And thanks for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Heather Sells.
And I'm Ephraim Graham. Grief and sadness across Australia today after a violent end to a 16-hour standoff that claimed the lives of the gunman and two of his hostages. The gunman, an Iranian-born self-proclaimed cleric, has been described by the Prime Minister as a deeply disturbed person carrying out a sick fantasy. The siege in Sydney now raises questions about attacks by lone terrorists in Australia and around the world. Our Charlene Aaron has more.
Mountains of flowers blanket the pavement at Martin Place, where the deadly siege began. Monday, a gunman burst into the Lindt Chocolate Cafe in Sydney and took 17 people inside hostage. The gunman has been identified as Haran Monas, an Iranian-born self-proclaimed Islamic sheikh with a long history of violent crime, including the murder of his wife, 22 counts of aggravated sexual assault, and a history of extreme acts, such as sending grossly offensive letters to the families of Australian soldiers killed in Afghanistan. The rescue of the hostages unfolded in front of TV cameras.
They made the call because they believed that at that time, if they didn't enter, there would have been many more lives lost.
2 hostages were killed in the melee. Katrina Dawson, a 38-year-old lawyer, and 34-year-old Tori Johnson, the manager of the cafe, who witnesses say died trying to disarm the gunman. During the siege, Monas ordered the hostages to fly a black jihadi flag in the window. CBN News terrorism analyst Eric Stakelbeck shared that Monas may have been influenced by ISIS.
He apparently asked for an ISIS flag, that black Islamic state flag that we've seen flown throughout Syria and Iraq. And also there are some reports, not confirmed yet, that he may have pledged allegiance to ISIS online.
He says some 150 Aussies have traveled to Syria to join ISIS in recent years, and that Sydney illustrates the rising danger of lone wolf terrorism, and fears have been rising through Australia and the West since the rise of ISIS.
This is the new face of terror, Charlene. Look, of course, the jihadists are planning the next 9/11 diligently, but in the meantime, these self-starter, low-tech attacks, these lone wolf, you kind of turn yourself into a one-man jihad. It started with Fort Hood a few years ago, and now we've seen a pattern over the past few months with the emergence of ISIS. ISIS has encouraged its supporters, its sympathizers throughout the Western world to raise up and turn themselves into that one-man jihad.
In September, Australian counter-terrorism forces detained 15 people in a series of raids after receiving intelligence that ISIS was planning public beheadings in 2 Australian cities. Also in September, Canadian authorities confirmed the Islamic gunman who attacked Parliament and killed a soldier was motivated by his ideology. Michael Zahaf Bibo made a video of himself just before his rampage. Canadian media report he praised Allah in the video and complained about Canada's foreign policy. There are also radical Muslims in the U.S. One beheaded a co-worker in Oklahoma. Another attacked a New York police officer with a hatchet. While it's unclear how many of these cases involve Muslims with mental illness, they are all examples of lone wolf terrorism that involve undeniable Islamic ideology. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
In Pakistan, Taliban gunmen attacked a military-run school early today, killing scores of students. Police say the gunman entered the school and shot at random before Army commandos could reach the scene. At least 126 students and a few school workers have died. Dozens of wounded children are receiving treatment in local hospitals. The Taliban group that claimed responsibility for the mass shooting is trying to overthrow the Pakistani government. A Taliban spokesman said that 6 suicide bombers carried out the attack in revenge for Taliban members killed by Pakistani authorities.
The manhunt continues for a former Marine suspected of shooting and killing his ex-wife and 5 of her relatives. It happened yesterday in Pennsylvania, a town just north of Philadelphia. Police say former Marine reservist Bradley William Stone went to 3 different homes in 3 towns on a killing spree. He's accused of killing his former sister-in-law, her husband, and daughter. Their son survived but was wounded and is in the hospital at this hour. Officers say they also found the bodies of Stone's former mother-in-law and grandmother-in-law. Detectives believe he shot his ex-wife next.
She was a sweet girl, took good care of her kids. Her mom was always over here helping her.
Police say Stone gave his daughters to a neighbor unharmed before fleeing. SWAT teams are still searching for him.
The price of oil has been plunging. It just dropped 12% in 1 week. And now OPEC says it intends to let the price plummet further. So far, it's been great for American drivers who are seeing the lowest gas prices in 5 years. But it could undermine U.S. oil drillers. And as Mark Martin explains, that some say that's exactly what OPEC is trying to do.
Lower energy prices have been an early Christmas present for consumers, but they also hurt companies that drill for oil. And with oil prices at $60 a barrel, fracking is facing a challenge. Fracking, which extracts oil and gas from deep in the earth using chemicals and water, is an expensive process. The technique is part of what has helped bring down oil prices by increasing supply. But some fracking companies may not survive their own success. Lower prices have sent oil company shares plummeting and forced companies to cut spending. BP says it will aim to cut costs by $1 billion next year. Policy analyst Phil Kerpen says Saudi Arabia and OPEC are also trying to use the low world oil prices as a weapon to kill off fracking as an industry by making the process too expensive compared to the price of oil. OPEC has decided to not curb production in an effort to raise oil prices.
They don't like the competition from the U.S. They think that if they drop the price and cause enough pain, they'll push some of them out of business, then they'll be able to raise the price back up.
But Kerpen says it's a risky maneuver for the Saudis.
Their national budget in their country cannot balance if the price of oil is under about $90 a barrel. And of course, it's well below that now. So there's a real question how long they can live themselves with prices where they are right now before they have to kind of give up and let things go back to normal.
Industry analysts say some fracking operations will survive the low oil prices, while others may fold. Mark Martin, CBN News.
And still to come, why Dr. Ben Carson is comparing President Obama to Russia's power-hungry President Putin. CBN's David Brody gets up close and personal with the famous neurosurgeon who could be a presidential hopeful.
Peace through strength. That was the motto during the Cold War. But when the Iron Curtain fell, some nations in the West let down their guard. Now NATO is weak and Russia is once again a dangerous threat. European correspondent Dale Hurd has been investigating the potential rise of a new Cold War, and he brings us this report.
There is a bear in the woods.
This 1984 Reagan campaign commercial reminded voters that the Soviet Union was a dangerous adversary and that America needed a strong military to oppose the Russian bear. In 2014, there is a bear in the woods again. But this time, NATO and Western Europe seem unprepared. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Western Europe began to disarm. Now it's scrambling to rearm. When a suspected Russian sub entered its waters in October, Sweden was not able to find it. Some say because it scrapped its anti-submarine helicopters. In these waters off the coast of Sweden, suspected Russian submarines play cat and mouse with the Swedish Navy. But because Sweden has gutted its military, it's become increasingly difficult for the Swedish cat to catch the Russian mouse. This article says Sweden's military is the weakest it's been since the 1500s. Swedish economist Tino Sanandaji, who writes for National Review, calls Sweden's military nothing more than an answering machine, stripped down to save money.
Because the assumption is, oh, but Russia is a peaceful country now. But, we can see that Russia is, at the very least, an opportunistic power. If they sense weakness, they're going to push forward.
Anna Wieslander of the Swedish Institute of International Affairs.
During the 1990s and up to around 2005, you could see that Russia was orienting towards the West, and it had an interest in democracy and market economy and to stick with the European security system of shared values, respect for territorial integrity. And then things started to change.
Now it will take years to rebuild Sweden's deterrent force. It's the same story across the NATO alliance. Mostly tiny skeleton militaries on Russia's border. The Baltic states are said to share a grand total of one old Soviet tank. And the number of dedicated NATO forces across Western Europe is only 10,000, facing at minimum 140,000 combat-ready Russian troops. Defense expert Gary Schmidt.
NATO defense spending has been declining, and you have very thin NATO allied forces. I mean, they're limited in number, and more importantly, their readiness levels are very low these days. There's great examples all throughout the alliance where planes aren't ready to fly, ships are in port because they need repairs and the like.
American tanks were removed from Europe completely last year, before the Pentagon had to return them. This structure behind me is the new NATO headquarters near Brussels, still under construction. It was designed to show the strength of the alliance, but a lot of experts and the Russians are wondering just how strong NATO really is. Yes, the quality of NATO troops and equipment is superior to Russia's, but as Joseph Stalin is quoted as saying, quantity has a quality all its own, and NATO is outmanned.
Russia has been exercising their forces in much larger scale and divisions, and we've been doing very small exercises.
America's military strength is also partly to blame for Western Europe's military weakness, at least when it comes to Sweden, according to Sanandaji.
Swedes know, of course, that the US is a global superpower, and they know, even the left, that if push comes to shove, if Russia invades Sweden, or the US is going to stop them. And they've used that as an argument openly, and sometimes not openly, but sometimes openly, to say, let's cut defense. So they're literally free riding on your generosity.
Russia could become very dangerous if Western sanctions begin to strangle its economy and create social disorder. Vladimir Putin has already threatened to invade Eastern Europe and the Baltic region, and Russia has been challenging Allied aircraft around the world. Russian military expert Alexander Goltz.
It's more or less clear, in my reading at least, that we are swiftly moving to the new Cold War.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Ronald Reagan defeated the Soviet Union through strength, but Vladimir Putin may not feel he's looking across its strength, but at weakness. And should he miscalculate and make a major move in Ukraine or the Baltic region, experts say NATO forces could repel him, but only after a very dangerous line was already crossed. Dale Hurt, CBN News, in Brussels and Stockholm.
And still to come, fallen but not forgotten. We'll show you how an organization is using wreaths to honor our national heroes at Christmas time. The huge Republican victory in this year's midterm election was just a month ago, and already politicians and voters are looking ahead to the presidential race in 2016. CBN News recently spent some time with a man who could be a most unusual candidate, Dr. Ben Carson. David Brody has more.
Dr. Ben Carson is known as a straight shooter, whether it's pool or talking politics.
You know, Obamacare is really, I think, the worst thing that has happened in this nation since slavery.
His no-nonsense approach captivates conservative audiences, and now the massively organized Draft Ben Carson for President movement has positioned him near the top of presidential polls. Indeed, it looks like he might be ready to move from medicine to politics. But first, he says God would have to grab him by the collar.
And how is that conversation going with God about this potential presidential run? Has he grabbed you by the collar yet? I read an article about that.
I feel fingers.
A presidential run would only add to Carson's achievements.
My life has been truly amazing. I think about it all the time.
His well-documented journey is told in the book and movie Gifted Hands. It begins in Detroit, where he was raised by a single mom. Poor grades followed, along with a violent temper that led him to a stabbing incident with a friend. On that day, the knife miraculously hit the boy's belt buckle, giving young Ben Carson another chance to turn his life around. And he took it. Alone in his house, he picked up a Bible, gave his life to Jesus, and asked the Lord to take away his violent temper.
Never had another anger problem since that day. And some people say you just learn how to cover it up, but when the Lord fixes a problem, he fixes it. He doesn't do a paint job. So, it's virtually impossible to make me angry now.
And if the doctor becomes a presidential candidate, he says his cool demeanor is going to help him.
I'm not going to take the bait. I'm not going to get angry. It's just not going to happen.
This could be the essence of a Carson for President campaign. A calm doctor dispensing ideas and leading a conversation on pressing issues, seeking reconciliation.
Americans have to recognize that we, the American people, are not each other's enemies. The enemies are those people who try to divide everybody up.
For example, those calling pro-lifers anti-women or traditional marriage supporters anti-gay.
They've been reading a book by Saul Alinsky called Rules for Radicals, which says never have a conversation with your enemies because that humanizes them. And your job is to demonize them.
Candy Carson, his wife of nearly 40 years, knows that her husband will be demonized by his critics if he runs. She understands the stakes.
Our country is going a way that's different from what our founding fathers were thinking, and we wanted to make sure he felt really called to wake people up. And that's what he's been doing.
The Carsons plan to lean on their Christian faith to get them through.
You know, in the Bible it says the Lord doesn't give you more than you can handle, right? And a lot of times you feel like, are you sure? Are you really sure? You know, but he does give you what you need.
We recognize that, you know, we are being instruments in the hand of God. He is the one who really orchestrates all of this.
Right now, Carson is putting together his platform. He wants a fairer and flatter tax structure, lower corporate taxes, and health savings accounts for all. But his number one issue, the out-of-control debt.
Unless we get a grip on that, why wouldn't we suffer the same fates as other pinnacle nations who have allowed debt to encumber their progress?
Carson also will not let political correctness get in his way. He plans to speak his mind on issues like the roots of this country.
We are, in fact, a Judeo-Christian nation. And I think that's a huge part of our strength.
Or comparing our current government to Nazi Germany.
And I know you're not supposed to say Nazi Germany, but I don't care about political correctness.
He talks straight about President Obama, too.
Our president is very much like Putin. You know, oh, well, gee, there's no resistance here. Okay, well, I'll just keep going. And the resistance needs to be there.
What would you want to tell him?
I would want to tell him, sir, I understand that you have very defined ideals of what you think America is, but you work for the people. They don't work for you.
Constitutional authority, he has overstepped that, you believe, in many instances?
Without question. And hopefully, the legislators in Congress will understand what they need to do.
What do they need to do?
They need to have a spine. They need to stand up, because once you allow someone to take liberties with the system, they're not going to stop.
Carson says it's up to the people to change America's direction.
People need to recognize that they do have power, but they do have to exercise it. It is our God-given duty to exercise that power.
And he's praying for God to show his power in a mighty way.
Do you think this country needs a spiritual awakening?
We most definitely need a spiritual awakening. I mean, look at the direction that we're going in. Absolute absurdity.
And the good doctor seems ready to tackle that absurdity in the wild world of presidential politics. David Brody, CBN News. And there it is. In West Palm Beach, Florida.
Well, I'll give you a chance for revenge.
Not your typical politician.
Not indeed, not indeed. I think he's going to run, and we've got 2 years to watch it all unfold.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Indeed. Stay with us. We're coming right back.
And Wreaths across America honors hundreds of thousands of veterans each Christmas.
The organization set a new goal this year to place a remembrance wreath on every veteran's headstone at Arlington National Cemetery.
And as we saw this weekend, the support has been overwhelming.
I'm standing here now to let you know that because of the support, we're going to do it. we've got the wreath.
Wayne Hansen is the chairman of Wreaths across America. His goal this year? Raise enough money to place 230,000 wreaths on each headstone at America's most sacred shrine. He told CBN News the kindness of Americans this Christmas brought him to tears.
To see the people out here today coming in, I started to cry again. I'm sorry, but it's just amazing to see the people to support them, waving the flags, the kids holding the signs. It really has been fantastic.
This year marks the 23rd anniversary of wreath laying here at Arlington Cemetery. It also marks the largest number of wreaths ever sponsored and delivered. Over the weekend, volunteers placed the $15 wreaths at over 900 cemeteries in all 50 states and even overseas. Misty Stratton brought her young daughter with a special reason in mind.
We started a new tradition with Sophia, so we wanted to get her to understand how important it is for each holiday to thank the veterans for what they sacrificed for us.
Board member Edith Knowles came to honor her brother, who died in the service.
I wanted to bring my brother here because he's never had the opportunity. He was killed on the battlefield in World War II. And I'm here to help bring the warmth of Christmas to the graveside of the fallen.
Remember, honor, teach. That's the mission of Wreaths Across America, which started in 2007 to carry on the annual wreath-laying ceremony at Arlington that began many years before, back in 1992.
They'll know that people do care about their service and sacrifice of their loved ones, and that they won't be forgotten.
In all, Americans placed more than 700,000 remembrance wreaths on veterans' graves this Christmas season, but the number of people who've been touched is countless. John Jessup, CBN News, Arlington National Cemetery.
That's a great ministry.
Indeed, indeed. Honoring our heroes.
Yeah, that is it for us right now on CBN News Today, and you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com.
Want to hear what you think about the stories you've seen here today? You can do it on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make it a terrific Tuesday, everybody.